And at the end of it, it's passion, that drives this. Like, that's what we respond to, is people's passion. I responded to Atta's passion that day, committing to doing the work to helping this third way get out and help these personal stories get heard, I think is critical. And I hope that I can work with Atta and work with you to help create this other choice, besides the 1% solution.
我的音乐经历是让我懂了一件事情 ，We always breaking the rule， 我们破坏规则，然后 making new rules， 然后 follow the rule， and again and again. You have to outside the box to think. Otherwise, 你就是一个数字而已 ，You're just a number.
Great. Okay, I'm Michael Hollett. I've been in alternative media and indie music for decades. I started Now Magazine in Toronto with my team in 1981. Became the biggest alternative news weekly in North America. I started the North by Northeast Music Festival in 1995 in partnership with South by Southwest. And they were obviously pretty good partners. They know what they're doing. And and then I sold Now in 2016 and to concentrate on the festival. And then last year, for some crazy reason, in a pandemic, I started a new magazine, a national magazine, music and arts in Canada, called Next Magazine. This thing. And so, so I feel like I'm talking to a comrade here with Atta. We seem like we both guys that like getting the word out, promoting independent music, and creating platforms to do it. So I'm looking forward to speaking with Atta.
我是在台湾出生的韩侨二世，爸爸是韩国人，妈妈是日本人。我也很荣幸这一次可以透过这样的视讯，跟加拿大的朋友们一起分享我的经验。那水晶唱片其实它的开始有点跟 Michael 的状况很像，我们是从一个自发性的社群，为了要介绍西方世界的新的音乐思潮，开始办一些唱片欣赏会，那我们叫 Wax Show、Wax Club。那接着我们就办了杂志，看得到吧？之后呢，我们也办了跟 Michael 一样的一些活动，我们办了世界的台北新音乐节 （Taipei New Music Festival），然后从此我们就开始了跟音乐相关的事业，包括进口，包括制作生产，到开始生产自己的 artist， 接着也代理了非常多英国欧陆的、美国的独立厂牌。那前后我们大概跟将近30几家的独立厂牌一起工作过。那我在成立这家公司之前呢，其实我在82年进入到刚开始要到台湾的宝丽金唱片公司的前身，那个时候叫 Phonogram Records。那 Phonogram 是由我们公司代理，他们另外的像 Polydor、Decca 是由台湾的另外一些公司，所以我的经历是从 Big Five 就是 Major Five 进入到台湾之前，就开始进入到台湾的唱片界，所以刚好经历了很多从 Analog 时代到 Digital 时代。那我现在还是维持 Analog Mind， 所以我叫阿达ADA。我就简单的介绍我自己到这里。
Okay, well, that timing is very significant. If to take over 86, 87, when martial law was ending, right around the same time. So was there a big there must have been big expectations, I would think, in the arts community. Like, were you expecting some huge breakthrough, and were you hoping to be part of that by taking over Crystal?
我们确实是在1987年戒严，然后同一个时间，韩国也有一个运动叫做 June， 就是6月民主抗争 June Democracy。所以基本上两个地方的民主化的过程是在某一种机制下发生的，而不是我们独立自主的成为那样的。所以韩国在那个时候有了第一次的民选总统的开始，那台湾也是在戒严。87年重要的原因是因为我们从冷战的结构 Cold War 的结构进入到所谓的民主时代，那民主这个字眼就会从那个时候开始经常出现在我们大众生活里头。其实民主的字眼待会我还会不断的在提出，也就是代表 majority， 不再像过去 liberal 的时代自由民主等等那个时代。接着我们就在88年有了一次农民运动，就是因为 WTO 的贸易问题，农民受到挤压。然后89年呢，天安门事件，也是希望认为这个冷战结束，柏林围墙崩塌。89年呢，我们同时也发行了我们的第一张 local album，叫做《黑名单的抓狂歌》。90年代呢，1990我们也有一次学生运动，就 Wild Lily Student Movement。所以音乐可能因为 freedom of expression， 就是言论自由，而从过去受制于政府管制，就是我们配合政府做一些 propaganda， 就是政府宣导，到进入到市场，由市场来决定音乐的时代的过程。一开始我们觉得解放了，我们可以做非常多的事情，可实际上我们又掉入到另外一个陷阱里头，也就是 market control everything。就是它的大前提就是1989年呢，美国做了一个动作叫做 Washington Consensus， 也就是后人在讲的 neoliberalism， 就是新自由主义。所以亚洲就从此进入到 restructure， 也就是说主权包括在内，经济、政治等等都在重新结构、在重构的过程。所以我的最后一句话就是，我觉得我们变成那个工具，就是那个时候的音乐人就变成是这个过程里头的工具。
So, when you, it sounds like you're saying you saw musicians go from serving the government to serving the market. So basically, in both cases, they weren't being true to themselves, and there wasn't. They weren't encouraged to be themselves and to speak of to tell their story, but they were trying to tell first a story to please the government, and then a story to please the market. Were you trying to make a third choice? Were you trying to create a situation where people could find their voice and tell the uniquely Taiwan story and the uniquely their personal story?
我们一开始就是86年到1990，确实我们是在做 Michael 在讲的第三条路，从音乐的角度来看，因为我们大部分的作品跟 artist 提供给我们的他们的想法都是非常的 spontaneous， 就是自主性非常高的然后唱片公司在这个过程的角色只是帮助他们去完成这样的作品的过程，所以我们从头到尾都不知道什么 marketing， 我们都是觉得他们的音乐很好，录完了才开始想说怎么办。所 所以我们在 production， 就是我们在 produce music 的过程中，在台湾的市场，我们是第一个丢出 recording， 不是 everything。所以我的第一张作品是用台币5000块录制完成的一个 master， 叫陈明章的现场音。
Sure. Well, I'll tell you what was happening in Canada then.
Sure.
I mean, one of the things that I have noticed over the years is I feel that Taiwan and Canada share something because we're both beside these huge other countries. You know, it's like, and they can dominate the market and they can dominate the creative thinking of artists, because an artist can get so in Canada can get so fixated in having success in America that they forget their voice and they forget to try to speak their truth to Canadians, and you can just blend in and lose your originality. And I wonder, in Taiwan, I think that would always be a challenge, is that you can just be washed over by the force of bigger culture. So some people turn and try to succeed in that culture, and they lose, I guess, their sense of self and what makes them unique. And you can lose your own national identity as well as cultural identity. And I felt that in Canada, what I was trying to do with my magazine and then with my festival was simply tell people it was good enough to be true to yourself and true to the people that are seeing your music, and creating that small audience and trying to grow it, as opposed to going for the big home run, the big hit every time. So it sounds like we were having a similar issues, and sort of because really in Canada, the major labels dominated everything through the 80s, and I guess in the 90s it all started to fall apart. But and what happened was in Canada that they made more money off just licensing a Michael Jackson record in Canada or somebody else than developing a Canadian act. It was they if they saw that act only having a potential success in Canada, they weren't that excited. So I wonder if would it be like that in Taiwan too, that sort of everyone's always thinking, oh, we have to have the big hit in Hong Kong, we have to have the big hit in China, or across Asia, or is it considered enough to be successful in Taiwan then and now? I mean, what we did, and it sounds like what you were doing, Atta, is we were sort of trying to change the narrative and sort of create our own stars in our own country that made music that was authentic to them, as opposed to trying to, chase the big hit, and there were, and that's sort of there's always being dangled out there that carrot, and it can be very distracting. And I think that, I guess over the years, what I try to do is I try to validate an artist's own unique expression, as opposed to convincing them they have to sound like whoever, the Foo Fighters now, or whoever, whatever is the big act.
其实我们会有很相似的状况，就是因为全球化的开始 ，globalization， 就是 one format, one control 所以 under 这样的 system 呢，我们很难从过去，像我是跟上一个老板借了30万台币开始做生意，是可以在这么简单的条件下，我都可以进入到市场。可是现在呢，你要是没有 China story、global story 或者是 whole region story 的话，做音乐的人只能变成是 self-employed， 就是每天做音乐，上音乐到 YouTube， 然后寻找资本、寻找资金进来的过程，所以是两个完全不同的状况，都同时发生在1990。
No, I think yes, there's a sameness to the sound. We have the same auto tune. We're sharing the same, we're sharing the same beat over and over and over. And that the fight is to find the originality and to step out. It's funny because so many Canadian artists now are having huge successes. in that global thing, in that global space. But does I guess what's interesting is that does that create a place where everyone's always just chasing the golden ticket, like like basically, does everybody want to be The Weeknd? Does everybody want to be Justin Bieber and Drake? Like, in some ways that success is inspiring for people, but in other, it can be inspiring. I talk to Canadian artists and they say, of course, that makes them think they could do it too. But the danger, of course, is if they just only chase that success. And if the only measure of success is to be as big as Drake, well, good luck. You're probably going to be disappointed. And does that mean that you spend your whole life trying to sound like Drake, or does it mean you spend your whole life trying to sound like Michael or Atta or whoever? Like, and to me, I want to find a way to keep those voices being heard and create an opportunity for them to be heard. And because otherwise it's just everything becomes vanilla. Everything becomes just one flavor. And I like a lot of flavors. And I know when I go to Taiwan, I have a lot of flavors, both culturally and in the restaurant. And I think that's important. I mean, I think, the whole existence of Taiwan, there's so many different voices and different cultures that exist in Asia, and the fight to keep them all heard is essential. But as Atta says, the momentum is in the other direction. The momentum is for globalization and to have a hit in every single market on the planet. And I guess the trouble is that it can be done. So when it happens, it makes them want to do it again. And I guess we need it to not keep happening so that we can create some more creativity in the responses and the ways that success is measured and the way art is celebrated.
我们在90年代，一切都是 market oriented， 然后还有一个大的帽子叫 globalization， 就是local markets 已经不存在了，所以我要 compete with the whole world， 所以资金啊，或是你的音乐内容啊，或是你要 deal with 的那些厂商，都是可能从过去的 domestic 的状态完全不一样，所以你要非常多的资本，不比过往，你要很多的 marketing knowledge， 就是不是 domestic， 所以在这个过程中呢，我们在2000年的时候又进入到另外一个新的阶段，叫做 state capital， 是原先是 globalization 的跨国的资金，可是政府进来了。政府进来的角色就是他要 take over 所有过去的产业的模式，再定一个新的名称叫 cultural industry。所谓的文化产业呢，简单的说，就是把过去的 structure， 音乐啊、电影啊、媒体啊、新闻啊、广播、广告，全部都摧毁，然后再放到新的模组里头，那只是为了要控制国家补助来控制产业的流动。那要做到这样的话，一定要先制造危机感。那这个危机感就是来自说，实体唱片卖不动了，产业已经垮掉，只剩下当初的15%了。所以这个危机感让业界也好，人民呢，很快就接受政府的想法。我就用一句结束这个事情。其实已经 normal 我们认识的音乐产业或是文化产业 ，everything is about capital gain。我们把所有的东西都丢入到资本市场，而不是我们当初所认识的。我们认为的音乐产业或是电影产业。
I hear what Atta's saying, and it does remind me of what was happening in Canada. For us, when I first started my magazine in the 80s, the idea of a Canadian band having international success seemed hopeless. So there were some people that chased it, but most people didn't even bother trying. And as a result, it was really creative. because they just made music that was real to them. And it gave me a lot to write about because it didn't sound like what was on MTV, and it sounded uniquely Canadian. And we had bands like that never had success in America, called the Tragically Hip. Is one of the biggest bands in Canada. And Blue Rodeo, they never really broke out of Canada, but they had great careers there. And so for a while, they really demonstrated a different way of having success. So I hear what Ath is saying, because there's kind of an irony that as acts from Canada became big, international stars, that could become a distraction, and people just chase that success, and they chase the very global market you're talking about, Ath. And I certainly have seen you see that. And what I find is that it tends to still be the people who feel the most hopeless about having success can be the most creative, because there are no eyes on them. They're just off making their music with their friends. Right now, what we're having is a lot of people are making music in their bedroom on their laptop, and they maybe share it with friends, or a brother or an uncle helps them create it. And that's where I'm finding the most exciting new music is coming up in Canada, is from people on the so-called margins, because they don't have that hope of that success that seems to distract people.
我可以同意 Michael 现在在讲的一种形式啊，就是录音变成非常简单啊。其实2000年出现的事情就是2件事情，一个是 homemade recording， 就是你录音的成本跟录音的技术技巧都变得非常简单，因为 technology 就是 internet 的关系，然后再来就是 Napster 啊。Napster 提供了 peer-to-peer 的 platform， 让可以躲过这个过去的这种 hierarchy 式的 internet 的结构，所以我们可以跟每个人交换，然后不用透过过去的付费的方式来做。可是这2个举动都只有一个原因，是要 atomize， 就是要把音乐人颗粒化，就是以前有唱片公司。像我们这样的唱片公司会保护这些艺人，也会提供资本，他们要录的成本跟做宣传。可是，一旦你把它颗粒化到你就是老板，所有的东西你都要做的时候，它的对抗力，也就是它的抗体相对的那个抗体相对市场的抗体就会变得非常薄弱。市场有非常多的 producing music， 可是 market 呢？就非常小，所以 competition 就是他们希望造成的。那他资本家就可以选对他们最有利、最便宜的去选这些事情。
I see that, and it's like they're not existing in an ecosystem. The artists are just all individual, being sort of there to get picked off, like in a sense, and they don't. And even, what do you think of this, Ada? I think even with so many solo artists, they don't have a band dynamic. You don't have a band gives you a support group, and there's less and less bands now, and it's more the solo artists hoping for that one big miracle, basically, right? I mean, it sort of plucked me out of my bedroom and put me on the biggest stage in the world. It seems to be the dream everyone's chasing right now, and of course what that does, that makes it harder for live music venues, because it takes out that whole piece. They're not out there playing and learning and getting audience feedback, and it goes back to your point of the globalization, where it all starts to sound the same, because everyone's chasing that one sound, that one hit.
所以再回到那个第3条路的事情，就是我觉得第一件事情是要 reverse 这样的状态。既然 capital 要 atomize 这些结构的话，其实我们在50、60、70年代有个叫 union， 然后它有 political meaning， 那 political meaning 就是代表 vote， 就是它的选票。 可是目前看起来，台湾的音乐人到今天为止还是 freelancer， 现在已经变成 self-employee，they have no rights at all， 就是 benefit 的 rights 也好，就是as a worker， 所以我们必须要去想说，要从 political meaning， 就像最近有很多的 class 叫做 precariat。对未来都没有展望，没有希望，这些人就是因为他们没有任何的 political meaning， 让他们 support 他们可以主张他们的权利，他们的 benefit。所以我觉得我们有这么多的 group， 这么多的新的音乐人，势必应该要 unite， 先从这个部分让在政治权利上有一定的位置了以后。才会出现所谓的 market 或者是 economy 等等的 position， 所以虽然议题很大 ，positioning 是非常重要的，不然的话我们一直会边缘化，就是音乐只是 serve people 所以大部分的权利都在 platform service platform。
I totally agree. I think that really, yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, there's people romanticize this idea of all these kids in their bedrooms making music by themselves, but they're making music by themselves, and they're right, and you're right, they're very isolated and they're very vulnerable, and they're waiting to be rescued in a sense, like to be someone go in and save them and pull them out of there, and they need. I agree with Ada. I think we have the same issues in Canada. I try to help in ways I can to create to help feed the network of musicians so they can share with each other ideas and experiences and learn how to survive. I want to go to a point that Ato was making earlier about grants, because, I think I've actually been impressed. I've seen that Taiwan invests a lot of money in culture, and in Canada, I encourage the government to put money into culture because, as I said before, we've got the hugest market. We both are having two of the biggest markets in the world dominating our area. So you need to support the culture. But to Ada's point, if you're not careful, you create a generation of musicians who are good at getting grants, not good at making music. And they make music that they know will get granted. It will get support, but it might not necessarily be the music they should be making. And again, it goes back to that sort of making everything sound the same issue that you're talking about, Atta. And I think it's true. And it sets everybody up to be fed into the big globalization sausage machine, and just sort of, we all line up on the conveyor belt. With this Taiwan and Canada, we're feeding people in to hit that one global home run. And I think, that's a disaster if that succeeds. I mean, we really lose, we lose all our independence and individuality.
我最近读了一些书其中影响最大大概叫做 MMT Modern Money Theory， 然后它让我知道钱是什么，是 actually 是 money mobilize resources， 所以政府用这些钱，用 policy 的钱注入到民间，它要 mobilize 什么非常重要，不是 GDP 的 number， 而是怎么去活化文化本来既有的社会资产 social capital， 就是让人跟人之间再次回到commons， 然后而不是疏离 alienation， 也就是我们今天碰到是每一个音乐人都 atomize， 就是在竞争的条件下，我要压过你，我才有办法到 charts 上或者是 number 上我赢过你。所以 policy 当然钱进来最好，可是你要 mobilize 什么东西才是重要的，而不是将钱丢入到 capital market。
Agreed. And how do we get it to be the right reason and for the right policy? What should we be doing to make? Does that involve us as lobbying governments and pushing them, or does it involve getting musicians and empowering them to be the lobbyists, I guess?
第一个我们可能要重新回到 economy。我们现在的 system 叫做 supply side system， 就是 capital decide everything. They manufacture needs, consensus, but it's far away from demand. In early 50s, 60s, there's a demand side economy. So everything starts from the demand side. 那 capital 只看到它的 size 下的 market， 譬如说20亿，对他们来讲才是 meaningful。是对于500个人、1000个人的 minor 的 musician 的 activity 或者 product 呢，他们看不见，因为 capital 的性格是这个样子，所以不代表没有那个 minor 的市场。所以我们必须要从 demand side 去想我们的 market 是什么。所幸现在有一个 system 叫做 blockchain。You can start from bottom, decentralized. 所以有很多的方式可以进行，可是第一个一定要有 political meaning, becoming political power first, then ask for change, ask for restructure.
Wow, interesting. And I agree, but again, this involves changing people's thinking, doesn't it? Because there's a certain notion of the artist staying above the fray in some case, like they don't get down and dirty and get involved in like that. But I think you're right. I mean, power exists with the people who exercise their power, and if you don't, you'll be powerless, and we see that. I mean, I think Adam makes a good point in terms of rearranging the hierarchy of success and opportunity so that there's not just one choice, that the multi-billion-dollar choice and success. I think maybe that's a role for people like ourselves, is to help expose this third way, this other way, this smaller, more personal way. And maybe part of it is managing people's notion of success, and so that they don't just talk about wanting to have the biggest record in the world in every conversation, but you actually talk about having a smaller success but a lifestyle that you could live, a sustainable lifestyle that you can work full time as an artist, but maybe not have a big beach house in Miami or wherever you should, wherever those dreams are these days.
到今天为止，所有的音乐人都变成商品，都变成数字。所以他在这个游戏里头呢，他绝对为了生存，一定会变成跟 Major League 一样，跟 NBA 一样，只有 1% 可以享受到最多的利益，可是剩下的都只是做苦工。就是 Washington Consensus 只是讲了3件事情。Deregulation 是把过去的规则全部都改掉，适合 capital 活动的空间。第二个是 free trade。free trade 的意思就是 one market， 以美金作为主要的交易条件，所以每个人都要去赚美金，所以在 one market 只有一种条件。对文化也好，对其他事情也好，只要它能卖得多，变成重要的数字的话，它就成功。最后叫 privatization， 私有化，就是原来的音乐是公众的，可是你要把它变成财产的话，它一定要录音化，变成一个实体的东西，它才有办法去掌控它。所以整个过程其实就是要让文化变成商品，所以我们只是在商品的世界里头受制于商品的游戏规则。 就是因为我们过去是 public 政府是 manage public purpose， 可是这样的话，它在市场没有办法运作，所以它要把所有的东西变成私有财产，它才有办法在市场交易。可是其中包括文化在内、教育在内、医疗在内，全部都从过去的 public purpose 进入到 market purpose.
The notion of free trade was only free trade for the largest corporations. They just smuggled
Yes.
it around, you know, it's pretty much been a disaster. I mean, you know, it's just you're right. I think Atta's metaphor analogy is perfect in terms of it's the NBA all over. It's like there's only that handful of people, you know, who gets that success, and everybody else is just fodder. They're just you know, they're just wood chips on the floor, like. And I don't know how we get that genie back in the bottle. I don't know how do we. I mean, watching that happen over the last decades was painful, as like we all talk about borders disappearing as a good thing. Well, not if it takes away their ability to control the condition, you know, and to underline local uniqueness and to support local markets. I mean, you know, before free trade, Canada used to have manufacturing, but it was protected. Well, there's no manufacturing in Canada at all anymore. You know, it's like, and that had a real price and a real cost, and people's lives were changed, and even people's imaginations were changed, because again, it comes back to the point you're making, that it's all about having this elusive global success that's so limited to who can actually have it, and it's devalued any other kind of success. And that's sort of the biggest crime to me, is that the smaller successes have just been devalued and made to seem worthless, where in fact those are often the most meaningful and the most effective and the most life-changing and personal, and we lose that in the globalization.
其实50、60年代的音乐人，透过 civil rights 的 movement 民权运动，它影响了全世界，它改变了全世界，那是音乐的力量。像 Clinton 啊，这些人都是那个时代的小孩，可是后来拿到权力了以后呢，其实走的是另外一条路线。我想讲的意思就是，我们曾经可以允许小的企业容易活动的环境，可是现在变成是创造让 big corporation 可以为所欲为的环境。所以第二个 reverse 你要去 reverse 怎么让 minor business、lifestyle business、small scale business can exist 的环境。台湾以前也有过啊，韩国、日本，甚至 even America 都有啊。只是 how to reverse。音乐是一个力量，音乐是组合最大群众的第一个媒介。现在虽然是游戏了，第二个就是音乐人自己要 recognize， 其实我们不是 commodity， 我们不是商品，我们有我们的自主想法。第三个，容易让小的 scale 的生意可以进行，不是音乐人没有办法做生意，而是我们的环境变成那个样子。
I think well, there's many good points there. I think, but a point that stuck in my head of what Atta said, talking about 50s and 70s, the notion of music being a soundtrack for social change disappears when music stops being from somewhere. When again, it's back to your globalization. If we're all trying to make that song that just is acceptable to everyone, well, then it loses the ability to speak of real things, because an issue that exists in Taiwan or Toronto or might not be the issue that they're talking about in London or Paris. And so if you want to be heard in all those places, you have to water everything down, to make it acceptable. And as I said, we lose that soundtrack for change, and it becomes the story of our own personal lives. And I think I think you're absolutely right in the idea that we have to find a way to celebrate small victories and to create circumstances where those can be achieved and that then be identified when they happen so that they don't feel like a failure, but they get celebrated for what they are.
其实今天我提了2个单位哈，一个是 MMT School， 他们在政策上提出一个，他们只提出一个政策，叫做 Job Guarantee。美国的话就是从这个联邦政府直接把钱汇入到各个提供工作机会，然后给他们钱，而不必透过中间的人去剥削这个事情。第二个是我们可以运用这个 blockchain 的 system，not Bitcoin, but the system to build up bottom-up system。第三个是 musicians have to wake up， 是他们是重点，不是做音乐就等于 money。You have to find your true meaning. Otherwise, 没有任何机会。第四个就是还是一直在讲的 political meaning, political power.
And to do that, I mean, it seems like in some ways we have to create, again, I mean, you talk about currencies, but the currency of success, you know, we have to redefine that. It seems like that is such a big part of it in terms of, you know, you're saying about musicians waking up and really seeing the value in this other opportunity. And in terms of, but how do we instill that? I mean, is that by, I mean, it seems like one of the ways is simply getting artists out in front of smaller audiences so that they're not thinking of the only show being the big stadium show. But you know, what is the situation now in Taiwan in terms of live houses? I mean, it was pretty good when I was there. And when I first went to Taiwan in 2012, there seemed like a lot. I don't know if there's as many. I guess last time I was there was 2019. I don't know if is it shrinking or growing?
Actually shrinking. 其实政府在说文化政策，可是我们到今天为止，像 Michael 在讲的 Live House， 我们永远过不了检查，就是什么或者等等啊，所以你到底你的 deregulation 是 help musician 或者是 restrict， 就是限制它，一看就知道。所以我们有非常多大型的 disco 或是那种非常复合性的娱乐场所，它是很容易拿到政府的执照，可是 minor 的这些就不行。我待会儿再提供一个我自己的想法 ，blockchain 的想法。
Well, I think like for the live houses, we have the same issues here because what happens is, I don't know, a club goes into opens up in a cheaper neighborhood, and then the club creates, you know, a dynamic cultural activity in the community, and stores move in, and the real estate prices go up, and the clubs that were at the heart of making the neighborhood interesting get driven out. And so we're now, you know, Toronto, I'll say, is trying, you know, they're even inviting people like myself into conversations, and they're trying to address it, but they're a little late, I think, is the problem, you know, is that it's happened and people are, the clubs get pushed out, to the margins, and it's just hard for them to function, and the support is not made for that level. It's made for the higher level that we're talking about. It's to get you to that 1%. But there's the notion of having the support to get you to that middle place doesn't exist as much. I think that's what we need.
就是我在4年前提过一个构想，是一个 coin 叫做 user get paid。因为以前的 consumer 呢， 都是在付钱，可是付钱的过程创造了明星 ，majority 买了100万张唱片，这个歌手才变成 superstar。可是 internalize 了以后呢，以前唱片公司要付的宣传的费用，现在都是可以从 user 你的 audience 透过 Facebook 这 social media 去做这些事情。那既然唱片公司过去要付宣传费用的话，那为什么这些人没有办法得到 benefit？ 所以我就想了用 Bitcoin 的基本，不是那个 blockchain 的 system 啊，有一个叫做 smart contract。譬如说 Michael 有一个 band， 他要办一个演唱会，1000个人就可以 cover 他的 cost。因为台湾现在有很多的 supporter 呢，会预付电影票，或是预付买书的钱，或是预付演唱会的钱，有点像 crowdfunding。不过我们唯一不一样的是去 create 一个 coin， 就是只有在这个 society 可以。那这样的话，1000个人先购票的话，这1000个人等于是 investor， 因为你在 smart contract 里面写说，超过1001个的话，怎么去 share 这个 benefit？ 那这样的话，这1000个人为了要赚多一点，每一个人再去拉一个人进来的话，就变2000个人。那 blockchain system 是 closed system， 所以钱一进来不用 top down， 也就是说以前是唱片公司或经纪公司拿到钱了以后再层层分下来。可是 blockchain 呢，是在同时间钱进来同时间就会分出去给这个合约内受到保障，
这样就会变成是 demand side economy， 就是先满足需求条件，然后再扩充你的利润。因为1000个人以后，要是没有达到1000个的话，这个 case 就 close 掉，所以它不会 happen。一定要到1000个他才走。那走了以后，你是老板的话，这1000个人都是老板的话，你一定想赚钱，会多拉一个的话，就变2000个了。2000个你就 share 了以后 ，user consumer 就可以分到钱。然后是 top down， 不是 top down， 是 bottom up， 不要经过唱片公司的分配。
And where does the artist get paid out of that？
你在 smart contract 就会写清楚artist 拿多少，或其他参与人多少。那另外是你没有钱去买票的话，你是 technician， 你是 engineer 的话，你可以用你的工作等同于你的投资，所以也可以把那些没有工作的音乐人，比如说是 engineer 啊，或者是 player 啊，都可以进入到这个 system 里头。因为 becoming coin 的话，也就是我不必要经过外面的 financial system。That's a close one， 就是所以那个付费的方式，大概有玩过 Bitcoin 的人都知道，钱一进一出很清楚，马上就会看到，而且会分配出去。那怎么去转换成 fiat currency？ 是政府这个时候只要丢一笔钱，譬如说 foundation 丢一笔钱进来，叫 stable coin， 它可以 switch。就是你可以用 coin 去转换成fiat currency， 然后这个是在这个 pool 里头永远在循环，它不会到 outside 去。
Who's the driver for the show? Who's the person that says, okay, we're going to do the show? Is it the artist?
Community.
The community.
Community.
Okay. And so they're pushing forward artists they like. How are they finding the act?
可以有很多模式，譬如说 established independent band, then you can use your community power to let the thing happen. But you are new talents. 重点是 demand side drive, not the supply side drive. blockchain system 有3个重要的元素 ：transaction, ledger, and the player。
所以 new talents 像我想要办一个演唱会的话，他可以在这个 ecosystem 里头去找一些，比如说是 player、promoter 或者是 media， 然后 combine together， 然后 under 你的那个 smart contract， 就是没有达到1000个人不能成立的话，这个 new talent 就要更想办法去他的 community 去完成他的 promotion， 然后达到这个标准。
I like it. That's just, I like it, and we need something else for sure. Well, I'm first off, I'm loving talking to Atta, and as I said to him, direct experience of Atta was at the Golden Melody in 2019, and I joke the show is a lot of fun. It's a long show, and maybe I was getting a little tired. But boy, I woke up when he got up and he made his speech and he talked about Hong Kong and he talked about, a lot of the issues we're talking about today, and at the end of it, it's passion, that drives this. Like, that's what we respond to is people's passion. I responded to Atta's passion that day. And I think what we both respond to in music is real passion and people's real reflection of themselves and telling their stories. And I think that committing to doing the work to helping this third way get out and help these personal stories get heard, I think is critical. And I hope that I can work with Atta and work with you to help create this other choice, besides the 1% solution that's taken over so much. So I think there's some great ideas we've covered here, and I think there's some ways forward, which is the most important.
我的音乐经历是让我懂了一件事情 ：We always breaking the rule， 我们破坏规则，然后 making new rules， 然后 follow the rule and again and again. Blues rocks, punk, post punk。所以音乐人其实本质上 essentially 有这样的能力。可是现在的音乐人都被制度，或是被我刚刚在讲的所有的事情绑住，不敢走出来。You have to outside the box to think. Otherwise, 你就是一个数字而已。You're just a number. 对 ，anti-establishment becoming establishment.
Right.
So.
And you're right, it's a cycle. We have to break it. We have to create a new anti-establishment. We can't just settle in and be the establishment. We have to make the new challengers. I'm with you all the way, Atta.